welcome to the Nordic Mythology podcast. I'm Daniel Farrand, owner of the company Horns of Odin. As always, before we jump into the show, I do have to plug our Patreon. It's how we keep the lights on. It's how we keep the podcast going week to week. And what you get from your subscription, your membership for joining, you get a bonus episode every single week, which comes in the form of our Q&A episode with the guests. And these come directly after the main show. It's a little extra. It's an add-on to the main show. The patrons get to ask their own questions in real time. The guests will answer them, and there are always questions that I miss. So there's tons of information to be learned there. There's a lot of fun that goes on there. The hair comes down after the main show, and they're a little bit more lighthearted, I guess. So if you like a show, there's always an add-on to that, and you also get the back catalogue of all the previous ones. So at this point, there are years of extra shows, bonus shows. There are story times. There's tons of stuff. So go and check it out. It's patreon.com/Nordic Mythology podcast, and it starts from £3 a month. And that's like it's cheaper than buying a cup of coffee these days. And if you can't, then a 5-star rating or positive review wherever you get your podcast. Maybe somebody else can find the show and they'll enjoy it, and maybe they can support. Who knows? But with that said, let's get into today's show. I'm really excited for this. This is our Spook-Tacular, I'm calling it. It's our Halloween show. We do one. Oh, nice, Mags. So they're the ghost, the ethereal Mags have guy in the background. Mags,
hey,
it's lovely to have you back. Our in-house archaeologist. I better not forget that. Don't want to get told off. Mags, thank you for coming back.
It's so lovely to be here. I've missed you guys, and I'm so excited that I got to be back for the spooky episode.
Mm-hmm.
I've tried my best with the ambiance with some fake candles in the back and turning the lights in my room to red hue, and I'm excited. So go watch this on YouTube, guys, if you're not following it live. Plug. There we go.
Nice. Yeah, you can get us on YouTube. You see all our faces. We've all basically tried to spook it up by turning the lights off. That was our effort.
Pretty much.
Yeah. I put a Halloween t-shirt on. Horns of Odin. You can pick one up now.
Hey.
Also plug.
Hey.
I've tried to be on brand too with black and orange, black shirt, orange pants.
Damn, I should have remembered to wear black.
No, you look the spookiest of us. You're underlit. You're ready to tell the stories. And that's yeah. So that lovely voice probably needs no introduction at this point.
Oh,
you've been on here a few times. You've done the story times with us, which again people can get from the Patreon. Also to preface, I guess if you want a bigger extension to the start of what we're going to talk about today, you can also get that on the Patreon. But we'll give you a little fill-in so you're not going to miss out. But that lovely voice belonged to Clare Mulley, who is a PhD researcher at Oxford in women's reception of Old Norse mythology, a poet and a performer. So the perfect person to tell some spooky stories.
Ooh, thanks for having me on. It's going to be spooky.
Hopefully. My friend asked me whether it was going to be scary, and I was like, I imagine it's going to be funny scary.
There'll be bits, I'm not going to lie, where you might want to turn the lights on. But, this is a good, should we say, a sequence of ghosts, and there's quite a few turn up.
Oh, damn.
Wonderful.
It's not just the one.
I feel like kind of Norse spooky might also be a little bit different than what we expect when we hear spooky.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's...
this is pre-Salem witch trials and shit.
This is pre-Salem shit, and it's all narrated true saga style, very matter-of-factly. So you have to fill in stuff yourself, and I will do my best to add some spooky ambience as we go. It's this chunk is relatively hefty, so there may be times when I'll run on and tell things quite fast just because I want to get to the end, but we can definitely do questions and things.
Mm-hmm.
I'm excited.
Yeah, people can ask the questions in that little bonus Patreon episode after.
Yeah.
So if they want to,
we're really plugging it today. I love it.
Today.
So, okay, what are we going through? What story are you going to tell us? Give us a little bit of background and I guess any information.
Well, I am playing the same broken record and going into my favorite saga, Eyrbyggja saga. So you remember out of the 3 episodes I've already done for the Nordic Mythology podcast, I've already covered 2 out of 3 of the ghost segments. So there was Katla and Gerda, the witches. There was the spooky calf, the troll calf, who just would not, they would not kill it until it killed the farmer. And Thorod Lamefoot doing his haunting and, having all these zombies following him around. That was a whole sequence as well. So it's a very ghosty saga. And the fact that those segments are not the spookiest or are the smaller ones is quite something, I think.
Wonderful. Okay, so this is you saved the spookiest one for last.
I saved the spookiest one for last because it's chunky. And I should say, I actually spent some of last week going round the actual sites. So I've not...
Wait, what?
I've not been at the farmhouses per se, but I was spending an artistic week with Kauri Paulsen and Georgia Sotetti in Iceland.
Oh, wow.
And we went for a drive along the coast and we did some awesome stuff. Our friend Katie was with us too, Katie Metcalf. She's an awesome artist and photographer. And we ended up essentially driving through the bit of the peninsula where all this goes down. And it really is it's such a beautiful landscape, but also it helps to realize how small it all is. Like the area is very small. So stuff would happen and it would breed a lot of storytelling in that locality, I imagine.
Oh my God. If that's not prep, I don't know what is. I know it might have been coincidental. Coincidental is what my brain wants to say there.
It was coincidental, but...
Didn't matter.
Still prep. Still prep.
I am...
Yeah.
Mucho impresado. Very good, Claire.
Gracias.
Awesome.
Amazing. So...
That was not Spanish, people. I was just doing a funny bit.
I was just being funny. But shall we get to it?
We should, yeah.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's do it. So I'm reading this off my Kindle screen. So if there's ever a pause, it's because I'm finding the screen. Oh yeah, that's ruined my light slightly, hasn't it? Never mind. Still backlit, I suppose. So we are on a farm up Snæfellsnes Peninsula, and this is the west of Iceland. And we are introduced to a woman called Thorgunna. So there's a chapter before this where they really skim over the conversion of Iceland, and that is going to prove kind of an important setting. A lot of this story contains non sequiturs, just so you know. So there's not always a definite reason for everything that I can always explain, but they make it very clear that this is this is a time when religion has officially changed, but locally it's generally not. They're still doing the old customs. So in the summer that Christianity was adopted by law in Iceland, a ship from Dublin put in at Snæfellsnes, and most of the crew came from Ireland and the Hebrides, but there were some Norwegians too. On board, this is a mixture of me reading out loud and just doing my own narration. There's a Hebridean woman on board called Thorgunna, and the crew says she has some very difficult and expensive things with her, quite difficult to get in Iceland. Hebridean women, as a side note, anyone from the Hebrides, there's a note of power there's often stories of magic associated with the Northern Isles. So we already have a signifier. She's going to be a bit unusual, perhaps. So the farmer's wife at the farm at Frodriva heard about this, and she was very keen to see what this woman had. So she goes up to the dock, she goes to see Thorgunna, and she asks if she has anything special in ladies' clothing. And Thorgunna says she has nothing for sale, but she had plenty of fine things to wear herself, so she had no need to feel ashamed at feasts. Thurid asks her to show her things, because she's curious, and they are very attractive and tasteful, not too expensive, but well made. And she's told that Thurid is willing to buy them, but Thorgunna refuses. But Thurid, the farmer's wife, decides to invite her up to the farm anyway to live there because she'll need lodging, and she's kind of hoping to sneakily get the stuff out of her at some point because they don't often see stuff for sale, and she decides this is very exciting. So Thorgunna says, yes, sure, I'll stay. Something you should know, I'm not all that keen to pay cash for my board and lodging, and I would rather work in exchange. I'm still strong, So Thurid says, fine, up you come. Come to the farm, come and live. So Thorgunna had her baggage put ashore, a heavy trunk, which she kept locked, and a lighter one, and they were both taken up to the farm. So,
Dun, dun, dun,
So you know how farm halls work. There's sleeping quarters, and everybody sort of sleeps in the same space, but they have bed boxes. So you have a tiny modicum of privacy, even though everyone can still hear everything going on. She asked to be shown to her bed, and she was given a bed in the inner part of the main room, and then proceeds to take from her trunk this set of beautiful bedclothes. Now, it says that the sheets are English, and this means that they are, for that time, they were very fine linen, if they were English sheets. And she laid a silk quilt on top, and then she put bed curtains on and a canopy, and it all looked absolutely marvelous. This was fancy stuff for that area. So Thurid, she's getting acquisitive again. How much would you like for the whole set? And Thorgunna says, I don't care how refined you think you are. I'm not going to sleep on bare straw just to satisfy you. And this is kind of the way she talks. So she does put people's backs up a bit.
She's a bit hoity-toity.
She's abrasive more than hoity-toity. She's an older woman who is very firmly spoken. And I think she recognizes Thurid's blandishments as she wants to get something out of her. And Thorgunna is proud of her stuff. I think it's all she has. So she's like, no, this is my stuff. So she settles into farm work, and they describe her only after she comes to live, which is an interesting side portion of how sagas often work. She spent every day weaving unless there was haymaking to do. And when the weather was good, she worked at drying the hay in the meadow. So she's a strong woman. She had a special rake made for her, which she let no one else touch. So again, cagey about her stuff. It's the impression there's something a little different, a little closed off. And it describes her as a big woman, massive woman, tall, broad-built, kind of stout. She had dark eyebrows, narrow eyes, and beautiful chestnut hair. Again, interesting portrayal of an older woman who's a bit imposing. There's maybe something about her, but also the typical misogyny means that she's described as old and kind of stout and fat as well. And it says her manner was always very proper. She used to go to mass every morning before starting her work, but she was very hard to get on with, and she wasted very little time on conversation. So people thought she must be in her 50s, although she was a woman who still had a lot of life left in her. So she's a confusing blend, this one, and people don't know quite what to make of her. And no doubt there's some conversion subtext going on here as well.
What was the life expectancy? Yeah.
Now then, that was something an archaeologist or an anthropologist would be able to tell you more. I would suspect for a woman it was older. I don't think she's meant to be elderly. I think she is meant to be seen as kind of middle-aged. Maybe in her 60s she might be expected to die, maybe in her 70s.
I think, because the thing is, so I'm not an osteoarchaeologist, but I've heard a lot of discussions on this point. And the thing with life expectancy is that it's super hard to calculate just because of like how, even though we do have a lot of skeletal material, like it's not representative necessarily, but we try to make representative calculations even so. But the thing is, I would say, like, just going off, take this with like a heavy couple of grains of salt, because it depends on who you talk to. But considering that this is a woman past child rearing age, or bearing age, I should say, she could live fairly long. Yeah. Especially if she was in a situation. Now, this maybe doesn't seem to be the case with her, but especially if she was in a situation where she had people who cared for her and wanted her to stay alive. Yeah. But I would say, depending on, like, because everything pulls life expectancy up and down, right? So hard labor pulls it down, childbirth pulls it down, illnesses pulls it down.
And diet, anything to do with how well you're living.
But at the same time, there's nothing to suggest that they couldn't reach like 60, 70. But it's hard. It's hard to say, right? Also because of the things that have calculated our life expectancies for the past couple of hundred years also relied on factors that weren't common back then, like urbanization and different types of hygiene or lack thereof, exposure to toxins, like in mining situations.
Yeah, and
stuff.
And Iceland, as far as it goes, is a tough environment, but very pure. There wouldn't have been a lot of dirt in that sense, not in the air around them.
And at this point, you don't really have... Yeah, and at this point, you don't really have heavy metals in the fish yet.
No.
I would suppose, at least. I haven't seen any data on this, but I would suppose.
I would suppose also. But there's this saga, as it happens, has a lot of older women figures in it. And the older women are very interesting because obviously there's a lot about women's, there's a lot of misogyny in terms of a certain scarediness about older women's appetites, as you will see. But also a great respect on the other side of the coin for the wisdom an older woman can bring. I mean, you may remember the story of Glacier, the troll calf. The whole point is that the old woman who has gone blind is the one telling everyone what to do and saying, don't let this thing live. And nobody listens to her. And then the farmer gets killed.
And she's like, well,
I
tried to tell you.
I tried, dumbass. But yeah, she's, there's a lot of mixed... With saga, I'd say there's a lot of, they kind of reflect their time and place, but like any literature, it's self-contradictory as well. So they never give any one message either, which is why it's best to just enjoy them, I think, unless you've set yourself the task of studying them. And even when you've set yourself the task of studying them, best just to sort of hold them there and say, well, it's complicated. So Thorgunna is a difficult character. And then we have two other characters come into the story. I won't give you much background on them. All you need to know, there's a guy called Thorir Woodleg, that's his name in English, and his wife...
Is he a pirate? I'm so sorry.
No.
I'm so sorry.
No, he's not a pirate. But he's got a wife who's a witch.
Okay.
So any Princess Bride fans who know the like, I'm not a witch, I'm your wife. She's both. She is translated here as Thorgrima Witchface. Her actual name in Icelandic is Galdrakin, like the chanting woman or chanting person. So she's of power, and she is said to control the weather at different parts of other parts of the story. She's shown to have control over the elements. So she's a spooky person. Soon there was trouble between those two and Thorgunna. They don't say what. They never say what. I assume there's a certain amount of jostling for position because they're all determined characters, and both the women have some kind of other about them. It's also indicated that Thorgunna quite likes the farmer's son. So he was the only one there she took to. She liked him a lot, but he kept his distance, which she found extremely irritating. Hjartan was 13 or 14 at the time, a big lad, very manly. So again, you may remember part of a triptych. Katla also found a younger man attractive and was thwarted in her attentions to him. Although that's more complicated in that case. This one is just unrequited. But some people have suggested that maybe Galdrakin, the Wither Witch, also found the young man quite attractive. And that might explain what happens next. So weather's wet.
I had just one thing that I was thinking about when it comes to the life expectancy with that one phrase, because it said something along the lines of she was believed to be near her 50s, but looked like she had a lot of life left in her.
Yeah.
I would suppose that means that they can tell that she is, I wouldn't call her old, but older.
She's
but
older.
That she seems very healthy.
That's it.
That's how I would interpret it.
She's hefty. We'd call her.
Hefty and healthy. Like she seems like she's not. Yeah, you can tell that she's.
This one's strong as a bull. She's your classic worker, and she would probably be invaluable on a farm. And is up until this happens. This is where it starts to get weird.
I'll be quiet now.
You don't have to be quiet. It's a family show. So here's the spooky bit, and we never find out quite what happens, but I've got my suspicions. They're drying the hay in the meadow, and the women are told to help, and it's sort of harvest time. It's been a wet spell, but they've got a good day for it. Nearly half the hay was dry. Thorgunna was given a good big heap of hay to dry, and they say here it's as much as would have been winter food for an ox. So she's clearly, they know she's capable of a lot of work, and she's given a lot. Everything went smoothly to begin with, but in the early afternoon, a black cloud began to form in the north, and soon it swept across the sky, making straight for the farmstead. it looked as if the cloud would bring rain, and Thorod, the farmer, told them to start stacking the hay. But Thorgunna kept turning hers as hard as she could, and she refused to begin stacking it, even though she'd been told to. The dark cloud raced across the sky, and when it was just over the farmstead, things were so overcast they could see nothing beyond the meadow, and hardly an arm's length inside it. And after that, there was such a heavy cloudburst that all the hay on the ground was drenched. The cloud vanished suddenly, and when the weather cleared up again, they saw the shower had been blood.
Oh shit.
See,
Yes.
I was about to say that I can never take weather horror very seriously. Always reminds me of The Happening. Is it The Happening with Mark Wahlberg where they're like running away from the plants and stuff? If you've not seen it, it's ridiculous. I think it's a Stephen King.
It probably is. I'm not a very good general horror reader. I tend to go for folk horror is my thing.
They made a movie of it, and it's like they're trying to translate that the plants are like killing people. Like there's something maybe with the pollen, something like that, but it doesn't really come across well when it comes to a film, like running away from pollen. It's just not that scary. So whenever like there's an ominous cloud, that's what it makes me think of. But the blood kind of helped there. It pulled me back into it pulled me back into like a horror vibe.
Good. That's what we're aiming for. Very jolly good. So in the evening, there was a fine spell of drying, and the blood dried quickly. See, no one comments. This is the miracle of Saga. No one goes, bloody hell, what's going on?
Bloody sky, rather.
Bloody sky. Maybe we should all go indoors. But no, they just go, oh, it's dried now. It's fine.
Also, that it's like when the shower is done, they're like, oh shit, is this blood? And not while it's happening. Like this seems kind of.
But then it's dark when it's weird. They say it's dark when it's happening, so they can't see the color.
All right, fair enough. All right.
And then when the cloud clears, they're like, oh shit, it's red.
I'll retract my critique.
One might. I mean, I wonder if some people have tried to explain this with volcanic stuff, but I think that ruins it. So the blood dried quickly, except on the hay that Thorgunna had spread, and neither this nor the rake she'd used would dry. So this is aimed at her.
That's quite.
And Galdrakin can control the weather. My feeling is, though nobody says it, we know there's trouble between the two of them. I think she's done this. Thorod asked Thorgunna what this omen could mean. Fair question. She said she couldn't tell. Most likely it forebodes the death of someone here, she said. She's not stupid. So she went home in the evening. She went straight to bed. She took off the blood-soaked clothes she was wearing because it didn't dry. She lay down on the bed and she sighed, and people could see that she'd taken ill. And the shower had fallen nowhere else in the country, only on that farm. So Thorgunna refused food that night, and the next day the farmer goes to see her to ask how she is, and she said she believed this illness would be her last. She's going to die. And so she reads him out essentially her last will and testament. So she's shown, while a staunch Christian, she clearly has some insight, and she knows that something's going on. And maybe she does have power. She says to him, I found you to be the most sensible person here, and that's why I'm telling you what to do with the things I leave behind. You may not think much of me, but everything I tell you will turn out exactly as I say, and nothing good will come of it if you don't follow my wishes.
Oh, it's a nice little biblical callback there.
Nice little biblical callback, isn't it?
Imagine somebody saying that to you on their deathbed as well.
You know,
that would freak me out.
Yeah, if you don't do exactly.
Me out too. And yet, remember what happened with the troll calf. Like, apparently some people don't listen, but then that's typical narrative fodder. So she says, this first omen, this blood rain, is a clear indication something serious is bound to happen, unless every step is taken to prevent it. So Thorod agrees to follow her instructions. So in short, she tells him, I want my body taken to Skálholt because she suspects it will be the most venerated place in the land one day. So her Christian antennae tell her, go to where the bishops are going to be. She says, there are priests to sing mass for me there. That's why I want you to take me there. That's a solid distance by cart. So that's quite a determined enterprise. She says, in return, essentially you can have from my belongings what will repay you for the journey and your trouble. But third is to have my scarlet cloak. And I'm doing this to make her less unhappy about the rest of the things. Because next, I want you to burn my bedding. She says, I'm not saying this because I grudge these things to anyone who can use them.
Yeah, she doesn't want anybody to have them.
But I must be firm about this. I wouldn't like to be responsible for all the trouble people will bring on themselves if they don't respect my wishes. So whether she will cause trouble or whether this bedding is the main cause of jealousy that's killed her or you're never quite sure. But she just says, you need to burn this stuff. Your wife can have my cloak, but she can't have my bed linen.
Well, I wonder why the cloak?
Well, she says it's because it's a sort of softener. I think she's anticipating that Thurid will not be pleased. And she's like, no, I don't want her to be pissed off. I want her to have something nice because she also wanted clothes.
Maybe the cloak isn't English. Maybe that's the crux. Because it very specifically said that the bedclothes were English made.
Maybe.
Well,
also,
either way, I think
I have no evidence for this.
No, that's the thing. This story is batshit. Like, there's bits. This is why I love researching it in my spare time. There's all sorts of conclusions you could come to, and I'm sure there's more that I haven't read on it. But some of the stuff is a bit of a non sequitur. So, sure enough, the farmer promises, "Sure, I'll do that." Of course, and she dies of her illness after only a couple of days. So there was bad juju in that blood rain, and someone had it in for her.
Claire, is there, because obviously they've mentioned Christianity a little bit, is there any reference to it being the devil, that kind of thing?
But that's it. This is a typical hybrid narrative. If this were a sort of hagiographical narrative or an obviously, a proselytizing narrative, then the devil would be at work, but it's not. It's just some weird stuff going on. And there is some propaganda in there for changing laws and the church, and what's the closest it gets to really Christian at this point is the fact that she wants to be buried at Skalholt. She's shown to be a Christian woman. Mm-hmm. But she is also shown to have enough insight and weirdness about her that other shit can happen alongside.
Because how long was this after Christianity had been legally?
The same year, I think.
I mean, it's not like your hard disk is wiped, so
No, it's not. So it's precisely that. It's this is a story where the hard disk is not yet wiped, but the law has changed. So yeah, this is the very summer that Christianity had been made the law.
Okay.
So, and mind you, she comes already from Britain, the Hebrides. And I don't know much about dates there, but my impression is that she comes from a place where Christianity has already taken a slightly greater hold, or is more widely known.
Okay.
But who knows? I need to check that one. So she dies. Here comes the next bit. So the body's taken to church. Thorid has a coffin made. He takes the bedclothes outside, ready to burn them. He gathers firewood. But of course, his wife comes up and says, "What are you doing?" And he says, "Well, that's what she asked me to do." And she says, "Oh, if I have my way, I'm not letting you burn valuable stuff like this."
Well, here we go.
Here we go. Mm-hmm. She meant every word when she said it wouldn't do to ignore her warning, said Thorid. "Well, it only goes to show what an envious woman she was," said Thorid. "She was too mean to let anyone else enjoy them, and that's why she told you to do it. Whatever we decide to do, I can't see what harm it can do." And he says, "I don't think ignoring her wishes will do us much good." But Thurid put her arms around his neck and begged him not to burn the bed furnishings. She kept pleading with him, and I imagine she did more, until he agreed.
Okay.
Because we can just say, "Oh, baby, don't do it, baby." Mm-hmm. It's very,
Yeah.
She's putting the act on him, essentially.
Been a week.
Yeah. Yes, they are.
But also, I like that it's not just men that don't listen in these sagas,
Yes, it's in its own way, it's quite feminist. Different people don't listen, and different people do the nasty stuff as
You know what? Representation matters. Equal shares of stupidity abounds.
I agree. Yes, fully agree. That's feminism. So they burn the eiderdown and pillows, but Thurid in the end gets her way and she takes the quilt, the bed curtains, and the canopy. All the same, neither of them felt really happy about it. Him because he's well aware, and she because she's probably a bit guilty, but she still wants the stuff. So they get ready to send the corpse off for burial. It was wrapped in an unstitched linen shroud, laid in a coffin, and they all set off, taking the route south across the moor. And nothing much happened on the journey until they came south of Valbjarnarvellir. They crossed the sodden moorland there, and the pack horse kept throwing off the coffin. On they went, south to the Northern River, and crossed it at Eyjafjord through very deep water. And they eventually came to a farm and asked to stay the night, but the farmer refused to give them hospitality. Bad move. It was getting very late, so they just decided to sleep there, spend the night without food if necessary, just lie down in an outhouse in the main room. The household went to bed. They hadn't been long in their beds before they heard loud noises coming from the larder, and some of them went to see if thieves had broken into the house. But when they got to the larder, there was a tall woman, stark naked, getting a meal ready. And the people of the household were too scared when they saw her to come anywhere near. The people who'd been carrying the body also went to see for themselves what was going on, and they saw that the woman was Thorgunna. And so everyone thought best to leave her in peace. Let her do it. When she'd finished doing what she wanted in the larder, she carried the food into the living room, laid the table, served the meal. And now the corpse bearers say, well, you might be sorry you didn't treat us better. And then the farmer and his wife say, oh God, we're sorry, we'll gladly give you food and anything else you need. And as soon as the farmer had said this, Thorgunna then walks out of the room, didn't reappear, presumably goes back to her coffin.
Is it scarier, her being naked or not?
Oh, I'd say so.
You say? Is it, I don't know. I don't know if...
Think about it. Older woman, misogyny, tall, proud, very naked. I think a lot of people aren't going to know what to do with that if the woman is old enough to be their mother.
But are you thinking, like, Dan, scarier for them or scarier for us?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm just thinking if I saw a ghost and they were naked, is that less scary?
No, I don't think so at all.
Like, I don't know why. I just feel like if they're nude, it's kind of like, oh, that's not scary. That's...
I'm going to sound a bit unavoidable pun here. I'm going to sound a bit cocky, but I think if I haven't personally seen a ghost as far as I'm aware, but I do think that if I did see a ghost in like a burial shroud versus seeing them naked, I think if I saw them naked, it would give me a bit of a start and I would be a bit freaked out. But then being naked, I think would automatically make me think that they were somehow vulnerable. So I think that to my own detriment, I'd be like, hey, you okay?
Is that a blanket?
Maybe we would. I don't know.
Back then, sure. Absolutely.
I don't know. I also think because it's already been described that she's an imposing figure of a woman, nakedness makes her even more kind of removed from the trappings of society, liminal, gone slightly troll. I think she would be very imposing because she's so big and tall, kind of almost manly. So it's the dress kind of makes her a woman more or signifies her more. But I don't know. That's just my reading on it. I don't think it matters. So basically all that happens from that point is along the road, the rumor spreads, oh, if these guys come to the house, you better give them what they want because otherwise the
dead lady will make them
will make you sorry.
Well,
all she did was just make a sandwich.
Yeah.
It's not like she did anything particularly nasty.
No, but she was clearly responding to... She was driven from the coffin by bad hospitality.
Mm-hmm.
And
she's kind of like a reverse Santa.
She's like, a reverse Santa.
You didn't do the nice thing, so now I'm gonna have to do the nice thing, and you're gonna be freaked out because I'm dead.
And I'm gonna hover around here and just be very boldly dead. And also, I'm going to do what I want.
Aspirational. I will be very boldly dead.
Very boldly dead. And also, she's going into their larder and taking their food out. So that takes control away from them as well.
Sure.
And yeah, when you put it like that, then the confidence of being naked kind of just adds to it, I think.
That's it. She's not a shrinky
It's a
little
power
thing.
move.
It's a power move. It's like, it's the power move of just standing there saying, right, fuck all of you. I'm going to do this. And then they're all like, oh shit, we better be nice to these guys. So I think is also the unspoken threat of what else she might do. Because she's dead. Yeah. Like, she could be really violent. The undead are generally violent in these stories. So she doesn't. And I think there is a smack of Christianity there too, in the sense that what gets her out is bad behavior, and what makes her go back is politeness. It's like dead Mary Poppins. She comes to dole out discipline.
Dead Mary Poppins with like the figure of, I don't know if this is going to make sense to any of you. If anyone's seen Arcane, the Netflix show, she reminds me in imposing stature as one of the main characters, Mel's mom, who's like a warlord. She's very big and tall and imposing and super muscular. And she used her nudity as a power move.
Warrior woman, nude warrior woman. That's what we're going for.
And she's very tall and like, she just looks like she's made of rocks and tendons, basically.
Well, I think that's the impression we're meant to get of Thorgunna.
So I'm just imagining her now, like in a larder, just going, you know what? I'm gonna just make this food then. So then, I see how the nudity would be,
and it's
would be a power move. Yeah,
it's not only a power move; it's also a silent and very powerful reproach that you haven't done what you're meant to do.
Yeah.
Where some of the hauntings in this book are totally undeserved. They just happen. But this haunting is someone's not behaved very nicely. I'm going to come and sort it out.
Yeah. If I walked into somebody's kitchen to make a sandwich in my birthday suit, that's definitely a power move.
I feel
like that's if I was to do that to somebody, if I ever walk into your kitchen naked and make a sandwich, that is definitely me. It's a definite power.
At the risk of a pun myself, that's literally a dick move. So there's a bit to go through, so I'll go speedy. So they get ready to go. The rest of the journey goes without a hitch because obviously everyone's nice to them. Big surprise. They get to Skalholt and they hand over the gifts that Thorgunna has left for the church in her will, and the priests obviously accept those with pleasure. And she's buried. They have an easy journey. They get back home safely, and all seems good. But things start to go downhill very weirdly from this point. So the farm, weird's good, right? So there's another omen at the farm. They've got a large living room. In front of the living room in the house, they're just giving us a bit of architecture. They've got two big storerooms either side of the door, one for dried fish, the other for the flour. And every evening in the living room, or the main hall, they'd have a big fire burning and people would sit beside it for hours on end before they had their evening meal. So you imagine Icelandic hall. The light is very like mine is now. It's pretty much dark. It's just the fire. That's all you've got. You in the dark and the wind outside. So the evening the corpse bearers came back from their journey to Skalholt, they're all sitting by the fireside when they saw a half moon appear on the panelled wall. Everyone saw it, and the moon kept circling around the room, backing from left to right, and it stayed in sight as long as people remained at the fire. The farmer asked Thoria Woodleg, who's married to the witch, what it meant, and Thoria said...
I can't take him seriously.
I know, the pirate.
What an awful name.
And he says, it's a fatal moon. He says, there'll be deaths here. And it went on like this for a whole week. And every evening, the same weird moon appeared in the living room. So that's...
Oh, I'm not staying there for a week. If there's a crazy moon thing flying around and
where
then...
else would you go?
And then Peg Leg Pete over here says,
you'd definitely stay because you'd be like, what the fuck's this? I want to see what goes down.
Yeah. You would.
Oh, I don't know. I'm getting a little bit spooked out. I'm sure I just saw like a little flying orb thing behind me.
Okay, maybe I was just projecting then. I think I maybe would have stayed for a bit, and then if it got too creepy, I'd probably go like, nah,
you
I'm the GTFO.
You ain't heard creepy yet, my friend. There we go.
I know. I just feel like as soon as he says somebody's gonna die, I'm like, well, it's not gonna be me because I'm leaving. Like I'm going somewhere else, especially not for a week. there's daytime where you can travel, isn't there?
Yeah, I
It's
do feel you on that.
There isn't daylight. This is Christmas, nearly.
In
So,
Iceland.
Mm.
Oh,
In
so
Iceland.
you got
Okay,
maybe
yeah, good
like
point.
30 minutes if you're lucky.
the sun might peak. In fact, it doesn't peak at all for quite a bit of the winter. Maybe just a weird twilight.
Yeah, it doesn't have to
So-
peak. Yeah, okay.
Here's
Okay,
the bit.
let's be quiet for a bit to let her set the ambiance.
Yeah, here we
It's
go,
gonna
here we
get
go.
creep.
So one day, the farm shepherd comes home. He's very badly shaken. He didn't have much to say, but when he did speak, he was very ill-tempered. And he kept muttering to himself. He kind of avoided people, and everyone thought he must have been bewitched. So this went on for some time. And when 2 weeks of the winter had passed, he came home one evening. He went straight to bed. He lay down. And when people went to find him the next morning, they found him dead. He was buried at the local church, and not long afterwards, a massive haunting began. So one night, Thorir, Wooden Leg, the non-pirate, goes out to the privy to ease himself, as they say in the story. He's on his way back to the house, and he sees the shepherd, who's already been dead and buried, standing in front of the door. He tries to get inside, but the shepherd barred his way, and Thorir began walking away, but the shepherd came after him and picked him up and threw him hard against the door. And this gave Thorir a nasty shock and a good many bruises. He struggled to bed, and later he got ill, and then he died and was also buried at the church. And after that, the pair of them, Thorir and the shepherd, were often seen together. And as you might expect, people were terrified. And next, after Thorir's death, one of the farmer's farmhands also fell ill. He lay in bed 3 days and he died. And people started dying, one after another, 6 in all. This was just about the beginning of Advent, but in those days, people in Iceland didn't observe the fast. So that's 6 people dead in about 2 or 3 weeks.
Damn.
Damn.
Does it mention whether or not these other people also start haunting the place?
It
We
doesn't.
said a massive haunting.
Just hang on. Hang on. You'll
Sorry, I
find it.
apologize.
No, not
Does
at
it
all. What?
does it mention whether or not the shepherd was dressed?
No.
Was he clothed? Was he nude?
No,
Well, we
it doesn't
don't know.
mention that. It doesn't. Clearly, it doesn't matter.
And from that, I think we can extrapolate that he was not in the nude.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
They would have remarked on it. And if
Mhm.
you remember the story of Grethe and Glaumer and the Christmas troll there, that started with the shepherd dying as well. And the shepherd, in
These
fact,
poor shepherds.
the shepherds are always the first to get bopped. It's a hard job on the hills. So 6 people have died. Now, the next, we pass our attention to the storeroom where the dried fish is stacked. There's a pile of fish in there, so high it goes right up to the crossbeam in the ceiling, and the door will hardly open. And people had to use a ladder to get at it from above. And then things in there start happening. Night after night, as people are sitting at the fire next door, they could hear something tearing at the dried fish. But when they went to look, they couldn't see a living thing. And that winter.
Oh, nice. They couldn't see a living thing.
Mhm.
I was gonna say because that would be me. 'Cause
That
I'd be a
would be
hungry
you.
little boy.
You'd
So
be a-
if there's all that,
You'd be up with a harfisker and stealing people's supplies.
yeah, if there's all that fish there and it was winter and I was hungry, I'd be like hidden in the pile of fish. Just
Oh,
Imagine this. Dan ran away, had only 30 minutes of daylight, went, fuck this, it was creepy, but I'm hungry, so I'm going to go back. And then just
My-
lurks.
my hiding place is in the middle of the pile of fish,
Like
and
Gollum.
that's where I'm hiding.
They can't get me. I'm underneath the fish.
I'm underneath the fish.
Right? Yeah,
Right.
you can't harm me if I'm in the fish.
I'm surrounded by
Okay.
so much death.
Whatever comes, I guarantee you, whatever comes next, you're not going to know what it is. So, well, you might anyway. There's been a little clue. So Thorod the farmer goes out to the place called Ness to get more dried fish for himself. There's 6 of them together in a 10-oared boat, and they bugger off to spend the night at Ness. So everyone at the farm, in their absence, is gathering by the fire as usual. But that night, when the fire had been lit, people came into the living room and they saw a seal's head coming up through the floor. One of the servants.
How Scooby-Doo is that?
Isn't
Just
it
like a little
Scooby-Doo?
seal,
Isn't it?
a little seal head just
So
popping up.
it's a big one. It comes up through the floor. One of the servants is the first to notice it. You imagine noticing that fucking shit. There's a seal head coming through the floor. Runs over and tries to club it on the head. hit the seal.
Very in touch with reality. You know what? I creds to this person for just going
for it.
They are acting. They're like, nope.
Doing something. Yeah. She grabbed a club in the doorway, hit the seal on the head, but this only made it rise up out of the ground a little more. And then it turned its eyes towards the canopy from Thor Gunnar's bed.
This is like Halloween whack-a-mole,
isn't it? It's like it's looking at the stolen bed sheets and the bedclothes.
This is becoming more and more Edgar Allan Poe by the minute.
Isn't it just? So other people, one of the farmhands decides to try and starts hitting it. But with every blow, it keeps rising further up until its flippers emerged.
Someone's process of elimination should have gone just like, this is not working. We should stop.
They should. And yet they keep trying. At that, the man fainted and everyone was paralyzed with horror except for Kjartan, the farmer's son, who rushed up with a sledgehammer and struck the seal on the head. It was a powerful blow, but the seal only shook its head and gazed around. But Kjartan went on, hammering the head, driving it down like a nail into the floor until the seal disappeared, and then he flattened out the floor above its head. And throughout that winter, it was always the same story. Kjartan was the only one who could make the ghosts afraid. So, again...
Was this the pretty boy that we think that the dead woman was crushing on?
That's the dead woman was crushing on, yeah. So, looking at this, the seal is looking at the bed linen that belonged to her and which has been stolen against her wishes. And the only one who can chase the seal away is the one she fancied. So... this might be an undead version of Thorgunna or something like her fylgjur, her fetch, or something just related to her. Either way, we feel a strong essence of the woman. And then more ghosts turn up. So the seal's there, and there's the 6 people dead, and there's the haunting. Next morning, Thorod, remember the farmer's gone to Ness to get dried fish, extra supplies? They put out in the boat, but they're all drowned. And the boat and the fish were washed ashore, but the bodies were never found. So now the head of the household is dead.
Pegleg is gone.
He thought...
That was very inconsiderate of me. The pirate is gone.
The pirate's already dead. He was the one who was killed by the shepherd. Remember?
Oh, shit. I lost track now.
I know, it's terrible. Thorolfur Woodenleg is the neighbor, and he's married to Galdrikin the witch. But
how many Thor-based names do we have so far?
A lot.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Look, it's not just you. It happens all the time. But
this is me every time I'm in touch with the saga. The names confuse me.
But Thorod is the one who is the head of the farm. He owns the farmstead. He's the one Thorgunna spoke to before she died, and he's married to the crazy woman who wanted the bedclothes.
Yeah, and now, they just kind of morphed into one person in my head.
I know, they do with everybody. But now both of these men are dead.
Doesn't matter now. They're both dead.
They're both gone. So he drowns horribly at sea with 5 other people. And so the news comes to the farm, Frodriva, and Kjartan, his son, and Thurid, his wife, who's still got those damn bedclothes. They invite their neighbours to a funeral feast, at which they had to use the Christmas ale. So that's the one thing that was meant to keep them going. And now they're using it for a funeral. Pretty miserable. The first evening of the feast, when all the guests were seated, the drowned Thorod and his companions all came into the room drenched to the skin from the sea. But people welcomed them and thought this was a happy omen because in those days it was believed that drowned people had been well received by the sea goddess Ran if they came to their own funeral feast. So,
you know what? Fair enough.
And it takes care to say at that time a good many heathen beliefs still prevailed, although people were baptized and supposed to be Christians. So they're welcomed in. They're all wet.
It's been less than a year, for real.
Less than a year. The hard drive is still strong. So Thorod and his men, they walk across the main room, which has 2 doors, and into the living room. They ignored the greetings people gave them and just sat down at the fire. Then people ran out of the living room, but Thorod and his men stayed on until the fire began to burn very low, and then they went away. And as long as the funeral feast lasted, this continued. Every evening, the drowned men would come to the fire, and it gave the people at the feast plenty to talk about, but some of them thought it would stop once the feast was over. But of course, it doesn't stop. After the feast, the guests all go home. So there's been a period of a few days where they're celebrating their lives. And in the evening after they're gone, the drowned men come to the fire as usual, all of them still soaking wet. And they sat down at the fire and they begin to squeeze the water out of their clothes like they're looking for comfort. And no sooner have they taken their seats than Thorir, Woodenleg, and the 6 people who died of the plague came into the room. And they're all covered in earth. And they start shaking the dirt out of their clothes. And they even start throwing mud at the drowned men. So there's a sort of jostling for position of the ghosts around the fire. And the people, as you'd expect, ran out of the room. And that evening they had to do without light, without heating stones, and without everything else that the fire provided. So this is becoming a real problem.
Especially in Iceland.
In Iceland, in the dark. Imagine being huddled in another room with no fire while ghosts steal your fire. That's how bad it is.
I'd be so toasty in the middle of all that fish, though.
And
I'd be toasty.
And you'd smell delicious.
Delicious.
Yum. No.
You would smell like a corpse.
Yeah.
Worth it, though. Not dead.
Not dead. Next evening, the people, so they decide to try and be clever about this. They try to light a fire in another room, hoping the dead men wouldn't come there. They think it might be the room. But things turned out just the same. Both parties came to sit by the fire. So clearly they want fire. And Kjartan, being the smarty boy, decides that what we should do is we should light the long fire in the living room and another in the separate room for the household. And they try that, and that turns out fine. Thorod and the dead men came and sat at the long fire. The living people sat at the smaller fire. And this continued the whole Christmas season.
Oh, what a shitty Christmas.
What a shitty Christmas that was. And by this time, the noises from the fish pile, where Dan is hiding, had grown much louder. And
I wonder what's hiding in there with you, Dan.
And people could hear the fish being torn up. Soon the time came for the fish to be eaten. You'd think they'd check before this, but maybe they're just too freaked out, and I don't blame them. Somebody went in there, they had a look at the pile, and they got on top of the pile and saw a tail sticking out. It had the look of a singed oxtail, but it was covered with short seal hair. So the man on the stack takes hold of the tail. He tries to pull it out. He calls for other people to come and help him. And several people, men and women, join him on the stack. They keep pulling and pulling at the tail, but they can't budge. They thought it must be a dead thing. But as they started to struggle more to get it out, the tail tore right through their hands. And so much did it do that. The skin was ripped off the palms of the people who'd been pulling hardest. And the tail was never seen again. And they started clearing the fish out of the storeroom, but when they got down into the pile, they saw that all the meat had been torn off the fish and only the skins left behind. But there's no sign of a living creature. So this is clearly another ghost, or it's the seal again, or it's something out of this world.
Can I have a guess?
Yeah.
Which might be completely off. Just because we're dealing with a woman who has been labeled kind of freaky in terms of the themes. We have an unidentified tail, kind of sealy, maybe oxen, maybe. I'm getting some sort of like Huldra vibes.
There's definite Huldra vibes. There are, I think what we find here is
people are drowning.
There's a lot of offshoots. A lot of it is very similar to what you will find in Asbjornsen. I think
because my timeline might be off. I don't know if there are any Huldra.
I don't think there's many. I think the timeline is not necessarily off. It's maybe just not called that. I think the hidden folk are a very old thing in that sense. And a lot of these elements speak to a tale. I mean, I think one just has to look at commonalities here. So we have a tail, we have a seal, which also to me bears Selkies in mind, water-dwelling beings. There's also, if you read other folklore, which I won't go into, there's the implication that Thorgunna might herself be from another realm and she's escaping that realm and trying to become a Christian, which Huldr do sometimes, or some people do. There's a lot of that about tails falling off, but you have dead people. It's just basically, I think it's a hodgepodge of many tail ends of folk threads. And that's what makes it so fascinating. There's no answer to any of it.
That's also fun though, because that gives, even if it's not exactly evidence of that, me being Scandinavian, having grown up with that folklore, that immediately gives me like, oh no.
oxtail, cowtail, anything like that. But it's what I find really interesting is you've got an amalgamation of the two here. You've got seal hair on an oxtail, which I've never found anywhere else. I think that's amazing. And yet, even though it's hair, it's apparently so able to have such strength and be so rough that it will tear the skin on the hands if you pull it too hard. So yeah, and crucially, what's happening is a displacement. Everybody is just being shunted out. So that happens, and the fish is going down now, so that's not safe anymore. Shortly after this, now you remember Thorgrim Galdrikin, who can control the weather and who maybe killed Thorgunna with the cloud. She fell ill, and after a short spell in bed, she died. And I wonder if she was left till fairly last to get more and more terrified. I would put my money on that. On the evening of her burial, she was seen in her husband's company. Remember, she was married to the non-pirate. And then the sickness that had been raging when the hairy tail made its first appearance broke out again. This time, it killed more women than men. 6 people again died one after another, and the hauntings and the night walkings drove other living people away from the farm, as it would. So it does the math for you here. There had been 30 servants there in the autumn. 18 of them died, 5 more ran away, and by midwinter there were only 7 left.
I mean, I don't know if this was the type of equality representation I was looking for.
Yeah.
Have we had 6 people die 3 times?
Let me see. Victim 6. Yes, we have. Yes, we have.
Oh, nice catch, Dan.
Yeah.
3 6s.
Well,
Satan is present, and we have evidence.
Yeah.
That's
These
it.
little tails there.
That's what I mean. This also has the hallmarks of a Christian story while not being explicit. And the way in which they get rid of the ghosts is half and half. So in a hagiography, you would expect a saint to come along and deal with them, or you would expect just a priest or a holy person, right? That's not quite what happens here. The old laws and the kinship are still stronger. So what happens is pretty boy Kjartan, obviously because he's the hero, decides that enough is enough. This has all gone on too long. And clearly the weather prevents people from going on and seeking help to some extent as well. This is what being up on the peninsula does. You realize what a barren landscape it is. Like, it's so beautiful, but there is nothing there. Even now, there is practically nothing there.
Something happens, you're fucked.
You are fucked in every possible sense. And it's bleak. So it really gave, even if your farmstead was haunted, what is there to go to? You'd have to travel days in any direction to get anywhere meaningful. And if it was snowing, double fucked. So that's why it's so, you wouldn't necessarily just be out of there. So
there's almost this horror of being boxed in while not being boxed in also. Because you don't have anywhere to go. Ooh, that's very Stephen King-y.
Isn't it just? And that's why I love this kind of saga for that. It actually gets small place living and why people stay very well. So Kjartan goes to Snorri Gothi, he's one of the key cornerstone figures of this saga, and a lot of it follows the fortunes of Snorri's control over this bit of land and how he deals with various conflicts. And he proves himself quite cunning and ready to inherit the land. And he earns himself the right through this story of being clever and just being a bit of a godfather figure. And so he knows what to do. Kjartan says, what do we do? This can't go on. So Snorri has at this time sent a priest to Helgafell. And Snorri asks the priest, who's just arrived, so clearly fairly new to the area, to go with Kjartan to the farm along with his son and 6 other people, again 6. And he says they must burn that canopy from Thorgunna's bed. You'd think they'd have thought of this before, but they don't.
Oh yeah. I was going to say that, like, as if at some point they've not thought. The lady that died said, loads of bad stuff's going to happen if you don't burn this stuff. And then loads of bad stuff happens and nobody thinks,
Maybe I'm
we
going to
should
burn the
just
stuff.
let's
But then-
let's just burn the bed in.
Like,
Let's
I guess
just
it's like
do
we'd
that.
have no a lot of these little quirks fall down to the fact that we'd have no story if people were actually sensible. I suppose that's the ultimate formula. But yeah, you'd think that actually no, there's a good point. Jennifer's made a very good point here. One which I can kind of refute, but it's true. The only person told to burn the bed stuff was the farmer, and he died fairly early on. But his wife.
Well, he
also
told his
knows.
wife.
She also knows, and I would say, if I was reading between the lines and giving this a novelistic element, she is guiltily aware that she shouldn't have kept that stuff. But often guilty people do the wrong thing because they also don't want to get caught out. I imagine she wouldn't want to be blamed for what was going on. So there will be, I would imagine there's a side of her, if she is like this, that will have held on to it and just sort of gone la 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 with her hands over her ears and been like, we don't know what's happening.
I'm not responsible. I'm not in charge.
I'm not responsible. It wasn't me. Never.
But didn't 6 people die before that farmer died?
Yes, exactly. And so
I would have imagined that he had, like, at one point would have just gone on, like, you know what? Fuck this shit. I know you like this bedding, but nah.
But he didn't.
No, he didn't. I know.
So it's a sign
I'm
of
trying to combat it with logic, and it doesn't work.
No, it never does. And you can only read between the lines and go, there must have been the wife herself must have had some powerful pull in her own way. And Thorgunna was not universally liked.
And
so,
but also in the saga's defense, do not underestimate the illogical choices made by freaked out people, especially when it's like long-term freaked outness and the weather and it's dark. Yeah, it's really hard to, like, I'm speaking now from like an almost like a ridiculously realistic standpoint, but
sure,
it's hard to keep people to keeping their heads straight.
We've freaked out. We've discussed this as well, like in the last Ghost episode I did. I think this was before your time, Mags. Like I put my penneth in about that too. It's the weather, the dark. People are not rational, and I understand that, actually. I've been in the dark with a door that won't lock and no power and in the woods myself, and it's anything can happen, or you feel anything could happen. Plus, I think I think this is an interesting story about what happens when women aren't listened to. Like, she'll be like, you don't like me, this may seem stupid, but burn my bed linen. Mm-hmm. She might know that there's bad stuff or guilt or grudge attached to it, which will cause ructions after she dies, or she might intend to cause bad blood, who knows. So this is the very last bit. And I think it has been a long episode, so I'm going to try and tie this up so we can get to question time. But this is an interesting solution. So it's Candlemas. They get to the farm. So Kjartan, the priest, etc. And the solution is that Kjartan goes straight into the living room. He sees the dead people sitting by the fire as usual, and he pulled down the canopy from Thorgunna's bed, plucked a log from the fire, went out and burnt the whole lot to ashes. Everything that she'd asked him to burn. And the next thing, Kjartan summoned every one of the ghosts sitting down to a door court for trespassing on the home and robbing people of life and health. So the priest doesn't do the initial move. He literally sues them. He's like, you know what? You're trespassing. Get out.
Iconic.
I think so. Mm-hmm. I love it. But it's a sign, again, that the oldest way is the law, not the church. And these ghosts are people who have lived under the law, so they know what it means. The charges are made, and they did the whole proper procedure. The jury was appointed, the testimony was taken, and every case was summed up person by person. And the ghosts speak. So as Thorir Woodenleg, the non-pirate, has sentence passed on him, he rose to his feet and he said, I sat here as long as people would let me. And then he goes out through the other door where the court's not being held. So the door is where everybody is standing congregated. And after that, sentence is passed on the shepherd who killed him. And he stands up and says, I'll go now, and it seems I should have gone sooner. And then Thorgrima Galdrakin, the witch, she hears her sentence. She stands up too, and she says, I stayed as long as you'd let me. I think I remember, I think the shepherd says, Settet nu meiden seiter, Or that story wooden leg. It's like, I've sat here while the going was good and now I will sit no more. So they all have a little one-liner before they go out the door. You don't hear all the remarks, but they all answer vocally to what they're being told and then beat a hasty retreat. And this is Kjartan doing it. And it was clear that none of the ghosts wanted to go, but they're left away. Thorod, the farmer who owned the farm and is dead, was the last to be judged. He heard the judgment, he stood up and he said, "There's no peace here. We'd best be all on our way." And with that, he walked out. And whether you interpret this as the old ways exiting or just a state of affairs is, I think, up to the hero. But you could interpret it either way. Then Kjartan and the others went back inside. The priest now does his job. He carried holy water and sacred relics to every corner of the house. And the next day he sang all the prayers and celebrated mass. And there were no more hauntings after that. And Thurid, the wife, ironically, she had been started to get ill when all this started happening, but she got well again. She didn't die, which I think must have been the ultimate. Imagine having been the one who most probably, it's hinted, has caused all this stuff because she couldn't let go of the bed linen. She's lost her husband, she's lost her neighbours, she's lost her servants. All she has left is her son. Imagine that on your head. And Kjartan, then he takes over, essentially. He engages new servants and he's thought by all to be a very courageous person. And that's the end of the Froda Runner, the Froda Marvels, they're called. But they're not really marvels, they're more horrors.
Yeah, terrors.
Terrors, the Froda Terrors. I love it. I think it's insane, the amount that goes. It's busy stuff. Like, one ghost is unfashionable. Why have one when you can have 3 sets of 6? And a seal.
And a seal, absolutely. I love how ghosts are portrayed. It's so different to probably what most people think of a ghost in modern times. We think of them probably quite transparent, translucent.
Nope.
You can see through them. You can't touch them.
I mean,
whereas
actually, it's quite earthly in that sense. Like, they haven't, and I like it because they haven't transcended to any next realm. They have the earth and water still on them, and they're bags of their bodies. They're zombies essentially. A lot of Icelandic spooks are zombies in some.
Yeah, it's like Walking Dead vibes, except they don't try to eat anyone.
They don't go after your brains, but they will. Their classic maneuver is to beat people up until they're very bruised. And yet that in itself doesn't do. There's the implication that it's more than just they beat them until they die. There's a sort of spiritual death. There's a corruption that happens. So they're scared to death or they have a shock and that makes them die.
It's interesting then what kind of the words imply, like ghost and stuff. Because are they described with the, like, what would be the Old Norse equivalent of ghost, or is that a modern interpretation?
I think ghost is a modern translation.
Because to me they seem more like undead.
There are many words in these sagas for undead. I mean, Droiger is very specific, and that's more to me supernatural. But things can turn into Droigers. They can turn into trolls. Glacier is much like these men. He's a slave turned undead in Grettir saga, but he's described as a troll. And we know that people can turn troll while they're alive as well. So it's a very blurred line kind of thing. But yeah, ghost, I think I'm trying to remember. I don't remember the word for ghost as we'd say it in Old Norse, presumably. Because there's Gast in German, so presumably in Old High German, not to I want to Google.
It was a good add-on from Alyssa here in the chat where she says ghosts were apparently solid and physical until in the late 18th century cameras were first invented. Double exposure and ghostly images and photos became a huge hype, and ghosts have been considered translucent and ethereal ever since. And that, to me, this is so cool. I had no idea, but that makes so much sense that is the case.
That does make a lot of sense.
That really checks out. Also with the whole, I've been on a vampire binge recently for some reason, and just like getting into vampire lore and like how like the aristocratic kind of smooth talking, kind of the handsome-ish, but also freaky vampires was not a thing until like the late 19th. I assume also you mean 19th century, Alyssa.
Yeah,
but that's just me being pedantic. I apologize. But like vampires were basically just like bloated corpses that like depending on where you were before.
They were, and Icelandic Draugr, the undead are essentially bloated corpses. The only difference is they don't drink blood.
Yeah.
And, they just come and haunt, and they're very violent. It doesn't even describe if they eat anything. Or they probably don't. They just they are unquiet, and they cause a general menace, and they beat people up, and they cause dreadful violence, and they essentially poison a place until they are put down. So it's very disturbing all in all. But I really like these kinds of stories, which I think says a lot about me, probably.
But it is, I find it really fascinating with like folklore and, modern things that we think is like super old.
We think it's super old, but it's.
But like, well, okay. Hang on. I want to rephrase that. Not that it isn't super old, but the way that we picture it might not be as old as we think.
I think that's it.
Someone in Iceland in the 12th century pictured a ghost, it would be vastly different from what we picture when we hear the word ghost.
I think so. But everything is experienced in the now, isn't it? And we all interpret things according to what we have been given. And therein lies the rub of a lot of medieval literature, because medieval's so vast. And you get a variety of very amusing texts which have clearly been put in a very different context, but clearly have nothing to do with that context. Or there's an amazing church fresco in Salisbury Cathedral where they have done biblical scenes, but the people are essentially dressed as soldiers that can be recognized with Norman helmets on and things. And of course, we know biblical figures wouldn't have worn that for shit, but that's how people understood it.
Mm-hmm. There's a church or like it's not from the actual church vault itself, but from an adjacent room from one of the stave churches here in Norway that's on display here in Oslo, where it's a lot of biblical stories are depicted. And one of the depictions is of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And they're playing a board game, which is most likely Nefatafel or something along those lines.
Of course.
What else would they be?
What else would they do?
Yeah. But I just like that. That exactly interpreted it from the now.
And in Völuspá, the gods play games, drafts, or what we call drafts, in their version of heaven before the troll maids turn up, and tension arises in creation. And then they go back to the meadow when the rebirth happens, and they find the draft pieces again. And clearly it's time to play more board games. Yeah. Clearly that's paradise, playing board games. I mean, it's a sign that you've got nothing else to do. You've got time to kill, I suppose.
For all my board game enthusiasts out there, we know.
Fully agree. I mean, I fully agree, actually. I think it's a big signifier of time on your hands and not having to do things.
And spending it with people.
And it's rather lovely.
Yeah, especially in a time when your labor meant your life.
That's it.
You had to get out and work. You had to farm the field. You had to, there was always something to do. So not having anything to do would certainly, I guess, signify you'd made it. Maybe you had someone else to do it for you.
I think definitely it's heaven and the paradigm of the rich would often overlap, because that's people's ultimate idea of luxury. What I love about sagas in terms of their interest is a lot of the stories you get, it's very matter of fact, because ultimately people are dealing with these things when they are working. They have to get up, they have to go to the field, they have to feed themselves. And the ghosts aren't just scary, they actually disrupt livelihoods. And they disrupt when you need to be calm, when you need to be well fed, when you need to be sensible. And that's what makes them all the scarier and more relevant to me. They're not just drifting around some tower that you don't go into. They are actively coming and crashing your house. And
which means that it's not just that they produce a sort of horror from inexplicable things or unknown phenomenon, but the fact that they're, impeding what you need to do to continue to live.
Yeah, they hit you right.
There were legitimate
right
threats.
where it hurts.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like having that guest that you don't want who just turns up and shits on everything. And you can't get rid of them, and they outstay their welcome. I mean, they describe it in the court ceremony much as the language of, well, I've outstayed my welcome, I guess. And that's exactly what they have done.
Perfect. Let's wrap this up and we'll let people jump in with some questions.
Yeah,
I want to just say, kind of to round this off, I just want to say that was a great horror themed story. Also, like, for some reason, like, just the mood, like the environment really sold it to me. Just like this barren winterland, it's dark and it's Christmas, which we also now today kind of connect with, like something that is supposed to be kind of happy or warm, and it's just everything's just working against it. It got me kind of
Well, that's the thing. And when we look at Christmas, it's a hard time anyway, because often there's pressure on it too, and you're stuck. Even in the nicest situations, you're kind of stuck with people in close quarters. Yeah. There's more tension than we would like to admit at Christmas. And if you go to Snæfellsnes Peninsula, there is so much ghostly history. It's all jostled together within this small space, and it is so atmospheric. I cannot tell you. Like, the hills are incredible. And the sea is incredible. Where I was staying, the cottage, we had a cliff near Arnastapi, where apparently Hattistupa had taken place many hundreds of years ago, and you saw that cliff stretching into the sea, and you're like, God, I'm looking at it now on a calm day, and it's blue and it looks beautiful. But some people would have looked at that and seen, one day, it's not going to be how, it's going to be when. My goodness.
Absolutely. Claire, thank you so much for taking the time to tell us this lovely, albeit terrifying story. Where can people find you, follow you, support you in any way?
That's great mention. You can find me generally. I used to do Twitter at Clare _Poet. I now tend to haunt Instagram. So you can find me.
Haunt Instagram. I love that.
You can find me. My Twitter my Instagram handle is at Clarify. Clareify, all one word. And if you want to find, we've got some, I can't give away too much, but in the next few months, there will be some stuff happening with storytelling and poetry and performance that I'd very much like to keep on with and keep sharing. So keep an eye on that. And the image that I posted for the photograph today is maybe a little clue.
Ooh.
Wonderful. Ooh, exciting. Mags, where can people find you?
Well, I will immediately steal what Claire said, and that if anywhere on the internet, what I do haunt is Instagram, which is albeit very seldom, and I'm shit at checking my messages or everything. But if you want to go and check it out and follow me, you can find me at Archeomags, Archeo with a K.
Oh, perfect. If you want to follow me, it's Daniel_Farrand1. I'm going to try and get better at posting my little adventures again, especially with Rocco. We get some nice pictures in different places we go. If the company is Horns of Odin, and then the podcast, Nordic Mythology Podcast, across the board, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, all those places, nice and easy to find. Let's wrap this up and let's let people ask you some questions, or let's just descend into chaos for 15, 20 minutes. Who knows?
It's going to be a great time either way.